Hello everyone. Today's video is on which translation of Dante's Inferno I think you should get. I have an older video on this same exact topic, but the audio was atrocious in that video, which is why I'm remaking this video now. And today we have 4 different copies of Dante's Inferno. I'm kind of crazy, that's why I have all these different versions. And so the versions that I have are the Mandelbaum version, the version by Jean and Robert Hollander, this version by John Ciardi, and also this version by Longfellow. And you can see that this is actually an Italian book for a video game, also called Dante's Inferno, I think. And you also have some video game art here, but the main focus is on the poem, of course. And so today we'll be comparing these 4 translations, and right off the bat, the version that I recommend is the Alan Mandelbaum version, and I'll explain why in a second. And so first of all, let us just focus on the Hollander edition. For the Hollander edition, let's just go through the pros and cons. So for this edition, one obvious pro is that this edition is extremely thorough. You'll see that this book is thick, it is packed with notes and references. So if you're a kind of like a university student, if you're approaching the Inferno from a very scholastic point of view, I'd say that this edition will be very useful to you. So let's just open this up and take a look. So let's just use Canto 5 as an example. You'll see that at the start of every canto, you get this really nice outline, which goes line by line. You get this entire canto divided based on its lines, and then you get a clear idea of what to expect before the start of every canto. And then within the text itself, you can see that here you have the translation, and here you also have the original Italian placed just adjacent to the text. So imagine if you're also studying translation, Italian translation, or if you're studying the translation of classical texts and you want to see how Hollander translates each line, I'd say that this layout will be extremely useful. For me personally, I don't speak any Italian at all. This wasn't as useful for me. I just focused on the English translation, but I can imagine for someone who's studying translation or someone who does speak Italian, this will be extremely useful. And also, I think the main highlight of this edition will be the notes. You'll see that at the end of every canto, you have all these extremely detailed and extremely thorough notes. Pretty much almost goes line by line on all the subtleties and all the references. I personally did not go through every single note, of course. There's just way too much. I can imagine if you're studying this in university, let's say if you're a student, this will be extremely useful because it covers literally everything you have there is to know about the references and all the subtleties and all the nuances. And when I was reading the text, I'm kind of just a casual reader of the Inferno. When I encountered references that I didn't quite understand or parts that I wanted to understand better, I just kept going back to these notes, and these were definitely very, very useful. So this is one, this is actually the major highlight of this edition. This is a very, very well-researched edition. And also one small point I want to highlight is that I just really like this edition because it also comes with a very, very nice diagram. I just really like this diagram. I'm kind of a sucker for maps, and I just really like this diagram of hell, all the different circles of hell that Dante and Virgil had to go through. And then here you have this really nice outline, and this was just really, really nice. This really helped me understand what was going on. And so this is the Hollander edition. So for the cons of this book, I'd say the translation itself does sound kind of dry. So I don't speak any Italian. I can't really comment on the quality of the translation, but for me, I've just found the translation a little bit dry. So you'll see that here, for example, let's just use Canto 4 as an example. We have a thunderclap broke my deep sleep, so that I started up like one shaken away by force. You see that it does sound kind of literal. It does sound kind of dry. There's no meter. There's no rhyme. So for someone like me who was approaching the Inferno as a casual reader, the translation was a bit dry, and I did get a little bit bored halfway through this translation. And so that is one con that I have to mention for this edition. Now moving on to the John Ciardi edition, I think the main selling point of this edition is that it comes with rhyme. So let's just take a look at an example. Let's just start with Canto 4 again. And so as an example, a monstrous clap of thunder broke apart the swoon that stuffed my head like one awakened by violent hands. I leapt up with a start. So you can see that every first and third line rhymes with each other. You'll see that John Ciardi actually breaks up the entire poem into these stanzas of 3, and then within every stanza, the first and third line will rhyme. And you'll notice that this actually doesn't really recreate the terza rima of Dante. So if you're aware, let's just take a look at the original Italian. So for terza rima, you'll see that for every line, the second line that comes after it will rhyme it with itself. So you can see that. I don't know any Italian, but just visually you can see it. For example, here you can see that every line rhymes with the second line that comes after it. So here you have this and this. So I don't speak any Italian, but just visually you can see the terza rima in action. But of course, this is really very, very hard to recreate in English. And so here uh, in Ciardi's translation, you'll have for every single stanza, you'll see the first and third line rhyme, but it doesn't recreate the terza rima. And Ciardi himself explains it as this is not exactly a translation, but more like a transposition. So he's not trying to recreate the entire Italian experience of Dante's Inferno. He's transposing the original Italian into something that makes sense in English. So this is the end product of his efforts. And so I'd say the rhyming itself is a big selling point of this edition because it does make the poem a pretty good read. It adds a lot of energy and a lot of rhythm to the entire poem. So that's something I really enjoyed. And other quality of life pros about this book is that it, of course, comes with these really nice summaries before the start of each canto, which helps you understand what is going on a bit better, gives you a brief idea of what to expect within this canto, and it also comes with its own share of notes. For example, at the end of every canto, you also have notes. Definitely, compared to the Hollander edition, the notes are far less extensive. But for a casual reader like myself, the Hollander edition can be a bit overwhelming. So this is actually really, really nice and strikes a good balance between being clear and thorough and also not being too overwhelming. And also, this edition comes with some diagrams, which let's see if I can find it. And as someone who really likes diagrams, this was really nice. But I still think the Hollander diagram was the best. But still, you have these really nice diagram, and there should be another diagram near the back because you get this very weird circle of hell later on, which has these subdivisions over here, and then you'll see that Ciardi included these diagrams to explain what was going on a bit better. And so I always really appreciate these diagrams. And so this is the John Ciardi edition. And so when it comes to the cons of this particular edition, I'd say that it's a bit more. It takes more liberties with the translation in that sometimes you'll see that the number of lines doesn't really match with the original Italian. So for someone like me, I'm just a casual reader. I don't know any Italians. I think I'll be less bothered by this. But I can imagine if you're really going for translation accuracy, you might be bothered by this. So let's just say, take Canto 4 as an example. You'll see that this entire canto in the translation has 152 lines. But if we go back to the Hollander edition, if we take a look at Canto 4, you'll see that it only has 151 lines. So I suspect that, let me just show it to you first. So for the end of Canto 4, we only have 151 lines. But for some reason, Ciardi himself was able to conjure up an extra line, so you have 152. And I suspect it's because he wanted to end this with a couplet, so he added an extra line. And as he said, as he described himself, this was just this entire translation is more like a transposition, so it's not like a word-for-word translation. So personally, as a casual reader myself, I wasn't really bothered by this, but this is something to look out for. And if you're really hardcore when it comes to translations, I can imagine you might be bothered by this. Now, moving on to the Hollander edition, this is kind of a fascinating specimen because this also comes with video game art. Apparently, they once made a game also called Dante's Inferno, and I haven't played it before, but it's supposed to be similar to the old God of War games, and it also comes with all these video game art, which was kind of interesting. I got this when I was in high school. There was a book fair, and I first learned about the Inferno when I was in high school, and so I got this for fun. And going back to the translation itself, I personally do not recommend this edition because it's just too archaic for me. So let's just use Canto 4 as an example to give you a feel for the translation. So broke the deep lethargy within my head, a heavy thunder, so that I upstarted, like to a person who by force is awakened. So you see that the word ordering is also feels a bit more archaic compared to the more modern translations by Ciardi and Hollander. And later on, you'll see all the typical archaic terminology like your thous and arts and shouts and these. So if you're into this sort of thing, you might find this translation very appealing because, well, Longfellow himself was also a 19th century poet, so his translation tends to be more archaic when it comes to language. But personally, I do not prefer archaic translations. I just found the more modern translations to be more direct and easier to understand, so I prefer those instead. So that's one thing you should keep in mind if you're uh, considering the Longfellow edition. And also, this particular edition doesn't come with the nice diagrams that the Ciardi and Hollander edition also included, and it also doesn't have the nice summaries of each canto. So if you want a summary of each canto, you might go for the other editions instead. And also, this edition does come with very, very extensive notes, but for me personally, I did not find these notes that useful. The notes felt far more tangential and just meandering. And I guess if you're a really hardcore scholar of Dante, you might find all these very meaningful, but for a casual reader like myself, I actually didn't find these notes to be that useful. I found the notes in Hollander and Ciardi to be far more useful and illuminating. So for me personally, I actually do not quite recommend the Longfellow edition. Now, moving on to the edition by Alan Mandelbaum, this is actually the edition I enjoyed the most, and I feel that this is because this edition balances all the pros that I mentioned for the other editions. So the first thing that I really enjoy about this translation is that it has decent meter. It doesn't come with rhyme like John Ciardi, but it has good meter, and I feel like that is very important for a poem. So let's just use Canto 4 as an example. We have the heavy sleep within my head was smashed by an enormous thunderclap so that I started up as one whom force awakens. So you can see that it's mostly iambic pentameter, and that holds true for the entire translation. And for me, meter is very important because it just gives the entire poem a lot of rhythm. It just adds to the beauty of the translation. So that's something I really enjoyed. So compare this with the Hollander translation, which was a bit more dry. I feel like even though this poem doesn't have rhyme, the meter was a really good selling point for this translation. And also similar to the Hollander edition, it comes with the original Italian plays adjacent to the translation, which I think will be very useful for people who speak Italian or studying translation. And also comes with a brief summary for each canto. You can see that each canto starts with a brief summary, which is also useful. They're not as long or thorough as the Ciardi summaries, but I think for a poem itself, for this translation, just a brief summary is perfectly fine because you're reading the poem anyway. And also, like the previous Hollander and Ciardi edition, of course, it comes with diagrams, but personally, also, I still think the Hollander diagram is the best, but this is still nice to have. And then at the end of the book, you have all these notes. They're definitely not as extensive as the Hollander one. They're more similar to the Ciardi notes, but then for a casual reader like myself, this was perfectly sufficient for understanding the poem. So I personally found this edition to be the best. And for this particular edition, also comes with snippets of haunting art from hell, I guess. I think you have a few more snippets near the back. Let's see if I can find it for you. So you have these artwork, which was nice to have. And so this is the Mandelbaum edition.